And thank you for that. Thank you for everybody for introducing themselves. And as I said earlier, I'm here to support what the community is wanting to do. So just, in the future, as Gerhard said, hopefully there's many more of these sorts of meetings and discussions with the community in Africa. So just, please feel free to keep me in the loop and let me know how I can help. And I'm here to support. So I'm very happy to, hear what people are interested in and to see what we can do as a group. And to build on what Tony said, since this is the first of these virtual meetups for Africa, it felt like starting with an introduction to what Hyperledger is and how to get involved would be a good starting point. So I'm going to just spend maybe 10 minutes to give just a quick overview and then answer some questions about Hyperledger, and then we'll hand it off to the other speakers. So let me just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So
Yes.
again, I introduced myself earlier, but I'll just say another word or two. I'm relatively new to blockchain. I've been in the Hyperledger community for about a little over 2 years, and I hadn't been involved with blockchain before. So I'm not a blockchain expert, but I have been involved with open source communities for over 20 years. I got involved with the Mozilla project in 1999 and just fell in love with open source communities and working with people around the world. I just find it so cool that any given day I could speak to people like you who are in Africa, and then I could speak to other people who are in Asia and other people in Europe, and everybody's excited about working together. And I just find the whole global collaboration thing really cool. So I've been involved in a bunch of open source projects. So I'm happy to bring any experience that I can to bear about how do we build communities in a region or around a project. And so that's a little bit more about my background. And do feel free to reach out to me. I'm on the Hyperledger chat. My handle is David W. Boswell. I should have included my email address on here. I don't have my email address on here, but it's dboswell@linuxfoundation.org. You can always reach me that way. And I'm available and happy to talk. So feel free to reach out. And I will start by saying, we want people to get involved with Hyperledger. That's what an open source community is all about. If nobody showed up to an open source community, there wouldn't be anything there, right? So I don't know how many people who've been involved in other open source communities before joining this meetup or before taking a look at Hyperledger, but really it's when we say it's an open source community, we really mean that. It's open, anybody can show up. If this is something you want to get involved with, that's great. Please do so. We welcome you. And so just wanted to give a few minutes more about just what does it look like to get involved in the open source community, what are the options, and just how to do that. So I won't read everything on this slide, and I'll share these slides afterwards so you can go back through yourself and take a closer look. But just to point out a few things, everything about the open source community is run by the community. There are Hyperledger staff members who are involved in the project, but we're really only support, right? None of the developers are employed by the Linux Foundation. The only thing the Linux Foundation does is provide the tools and the infrastructure and the scaffolding so a community can show up and do the work. So everything about the technical community is run by the community 100%. And it's really the community that, leads the project. There is a technical steering committee, which is made up every year. There's an election. And it's made up of those community members who choose to step up and run for the position, and then the community members themselves vote for those. So the community, it's by the community, for the community, run by, led by the community. So I think it's important to also talk a little bit about why get involved, because you certainly don't need to. The code is open. If all you really cared about was taking the code, it's on the repository, it's free, there's no cost. You can just get it and take it and use it. There's no requirement for you to get involved. But in my experience, there are some reasons why people choose to get involved in the community. And I'll just go through some of those. I think one big thing is that you can shape the direction of the project to fit your needs. So, if you say, hey, here's a project, this Hyperledger project, Indie, Fabric, Sawtooth, whatever it may be, you're like, well, it does a lot of what I want, but it doesn't do everything I want. Or it would be really great if it did this thing differently. You know, if you get involved and submit the pull request and join the discussions and help, you know, shape the project, you can make it exactly what you want it to be, which again, I always thought was pretty cool. Like, you know, I got involved with Mozilla. I'm like, what, Netscape really cares what I think, and I could help shape what the next browser looks like. I found that really, you know, really exciting. I was a web developer at the time, and I had thoughts and opinions, and it was cool that I could show up and share them, and people would listen to them. So you really can shape the direction of the project if you get involved and bring your voice and activities to it. Another thing is that you don't have to do it all on your own. If you want to get involved in the project, you're working with other people literally all around the world. So if you were on a project and you had to do all the work yourself, that's going to take a lot longer than if you were in a project where you got to work with dozens of other people, you know, with similar goals, trying to do similar things. So it really can decrease the time for what you're trying to do and accelerate the work that, you know, you're wanting to do. And then this quote here is often referred to as Linus's law. You know, the Linux Foundation is based, it was originally started around the Linux project, hosted, you know, which got started by Linus Torvalds. And he, you know, the story goes, he talked about, you know, one of the benefits of open source is being with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, which, you know, speaks to that you can really leverage the skills and abilities of other people in the community. So there are some times where you're really hitting a wall. You're like, hey, I really don't see what's going on here. But other people bring other skills, other perspectives, other expertise. And, you know, very often maybe you're not seeing the solution for a problem, but somebody else in the community is coming at it at a different angle and a different perspective, and they see the fix and they can offer it. So, you know, that I've seen that over and over and over again. So that's another exciting thing, you know. To really literally be able to tap into the expertise of others around the world. It's also a really great learning opportunity. You know, you can learn a lot. There's a lot of smart people in the community who are doing really interesting things, and it is really a great opportunity to learn. You know, that's certainly been my experience. Like I said, I didn't come into the community knowing a lot about blockchain, but now I know a lot more. So, you know, I find that to be really exciting as well. And it's a great experience, and especially for students in the community, you know, that experience could be really relevant. If you graduate from college and you say, hey, look, my code's in Hyperledger Fabric, or my code's in the Linux kernel, or my code is in whatever, you know, that's going to look really great. It's going to show that you are able to do professional level work that, you know, really has been accepted by these projects. And that's, I think, you know, something that, you know, really speaks volumes when people are looking for a job, and you can show that on your resume. And interesting, you know, I guess this one is similar to what I've already been saying, but you really get to, you know, tap into that worldwide group of people, and it's fun. You know, I also find getting involved with open source, you know, really fun. We did have our I'll speak to it again in a little bit, but you know, we did have our largest community event of the year earlier this year in March in Phoenix, and it was fun getting to hang out with people and meet people in person that you'd only ever met, you know, on a call like this. So those are some of the reasons why I've seen people choose to participate in an open source community in the past. And now just to speak a little bit about, you know, how to do that. As a starting point, here are some tips. One, feel free to lurk, you know, and by that I mean you're welcome to join a call and not say anything. You can just listen in. And I think that's very often a good first step, because often, especially if you're new, it could be a little odd to like just jump into a conversation if you don't really know what has been happening so far, or who the people are, or, you know, what's going on. So feel free to lurk. You can join. All the calls are open. You can just dial in and listen. No need to speak. You can join the mailing list and just read the discussions that are going on. The same on chat. And I think that's often a very good place to get involved. And after you've done that a little while and you can see, you know, what's going on in this discussions, then, you know, then feel free to share. Again, you know, everything is out there, and you don't need to wait for an invitation. You know, we have the mailing list, for example, and You don't have to wait for the project to invite you in. Yeah, everything, you can just step up and just, you know, subscribe yourself, join that call, join these meetups. No invitation is needed. And then just be aware that we do, it's very important for the Linux Foundation that everybody in the community is respectful and kind. And so to enforce that, we have our code of conduct. So just be aware that if you get involved, you know, I really hope that you will have a positive experience. And if you ever don't, just let us know, and we take the code of conduct seriously. And if there is some sort of an incident, we will certainly deal with it. But in my 2+ years at Hyperledger, really, it's never been an issue. Everybody in my experience has been kind and respectful, and you'll be treated that way as well, you know, if you join. And although I said no invitation is necessary, I'll give you an invitation if that would be helpful. So please, you know, here, you know, we do encourage you to get involved, and we'd love to have you, you know, come to more of these meetups, come to more of the project calls, get more involved and contribute. And then again, I don't know how many people on the call have had that prior experience with open source. So if not, here are some good general guides to get involved. And again, I'll share these slides afterwards. These are all links that you can point to it. These aren't specific to Hyperledger. These are just general how-tos around open source, but you may find them interesting. So again, make use of this as a resource if that would be helpful. And then just to go into some of the specifics more about Hyperledger, you know, getting involved in Hyperledger itself. The information about our tools are on our website at the link above. You can also click through here on these links as well. But we have a handful of tools that the community uses to collaborate. All of those, you can get an account for those. There's zero cost. You can get an account for free. That's what this first link is. Most of the tools are tied into a Linux Foundation ID. Once you get that ID at that link there, that gives you access to most of the other tools that we use. And then, so for example, we put a page on the wiki to coordinate this meeting. You could get that account, go to the wiki, make a comment, make an edit. You know, that's all open, freely available. You know, please do so. And then I mentioned some of these communication tools already, but the community uses a chat server. We use mailing lists, and then for the technical side of things, all the code is out there available on GitHub, and then we have Jira for bug reporting. So again, all these tools are there. If you're interested in any of these, if you want to join the discussion or join the wiki or you know, make that pull request, please do so. Get an account and you know, take a look at the tools. And then I won't go into a ton of detail about this, but just to let you know, if you are interested in making a code contribution, there's just a series of steps to follow. Again, I'll share these slides and you can take a look, but you know, we do want to make sure that the pathway is pretty straightforward. So just, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, take a look, and you know, you're certainly welcome to you know, make those technical contributions. The same with issue tracking. We want to hear if you're using one of the tools and it's not behaving the way you thought, or you're wishing it did something else. You know, feel free to submit those issues. And then just to speak a little bit, you know, it's not just technical contributions that you can make. You know, if I'm not a coder myself, but there are still ways that I can contribute to the project. So if you want to get involved, but you're not ever going to make a technical contribution, that's fine. There are other opportunities. So in addition to developers around the world getting involved to create the different tools like the Hyperledger Fabric, like Hyperledger ND, we also have what are called special interest groups, which is really, in my mind, the other side of the coin. You know, if all we ever did was just create the technologies but never tried to get them adopted, to me that feels like, you know, the community would be kind of pointless. Like, there's no point in having a bunch of code in a repository somewhere if nobody uses it. So that's what the special interest groups are. We have different special interest groups around different industries, and the whole goal of each one of these is to help you know, drive adoption of blockchain and Hyperledger in that industry. So for example, if you are interested in use cases related to healthcare or telecom or whatever it may be, you know, get involved. These are open as well. You can talk about your use case. You could talk about, you know, help other people with the use cases. Many of these groups are working together on different projects to you know, again, drive adoption in the space. So for example, the telecom group is working on a number of papers about different use cases in the telecom space. So if you're a writer, that's a great way to get involved. Or for example, the healthcare group right now is meeting regularly to talk about how blockchain can be used to help address the COVID pandemic. So if you're interested in healthcare and addressing, you know, what's going on with COVID, you know, join those conversations. So, you know, you don't have to be technical to get involved in the community. And I think the special interest groups are a good way for people who are not necessarily developers to get involved. In addition to the special interest groups, we also have some technical working groups that are addressing some cross-cutting technical challenges, such as, you know, how do we address identity in the blockchain space, for example? So, or you know, how do we, you know, make smart contracts better? So, you know, you're welcome to get involved in these as well. And that's it. I kind of went through quickly because I did want to have an opportunity to answer any questions about Hyperledger, and hopefully, Tony, that was helpful as kind of an introduction about, you know, what Hyperledger is and what's going on. You know, this didn't really talk through more about, you know, the tools, and I think the later speakers will give some examples of here's a Hyperledger tool and here's what we did with it. But hopefully that was a good overview of the project, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Hi, David. I'm following the chat. I can't see any specific questions in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't looking at the chat because I had my screen showing. So that's, yeah.
No problem.
Great. Well, and if there aren't any questions, I'll be on the call the whole time. And if other things, you know, come up that I can answer, I'm happy to jump in as well.
Okay, I think the next speaker, Idu Makindi. Are you going to do your slide share? Yep.
Yes, so let's try video. And if
Video,
if the network gets clogged up,
yeah.
yes, I will in a moment.
Yeah, I think
hi,
your video
everyone.
most probably will take a lot of the bandwidth, but carry on.
Just hold on. Let me take that out. And can you see my screen?
There we go. Perfect.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, David, for your introduction. I mean, this is going to be as fast as possible. I'm just going to run through these updates of what the Hyperledger organization has been up to in recent times. Just riding off of what you said, we Africans are known for the popular phrase Ubuntu, which is the spirit of community, the spirit of togetherness, the spirit of collaboration, you know, and that's the same spirit with which we've thought that is a good idea to organize virtual meetups. So, hopefully this will be the first of many to come. And hope
you are chopping up just a little bit, by the way.
Many impactful.
Hi, your voice is breaking up quite a bit. Not sure if you can hear.
So, how much I do to just of the Hyperledger. Okay. Now, hello.
Yeah, your voice is breaking up quite a bit.
Yeah,
maybe
unfortunately, yeah, it's chopping up.
Wow. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is this on now?
Still chopping up.
Can you try just your audio? Maybe, David, I'm not sure. That's also your slides, correct?
I believe he's sharing. I could try sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, I have those slides. I could try sharing my screen instead of his.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello?
Yes, now
Can you-
we can hear you, but I think let's share it from David's side,
Is it
the
better now?
presentation, and then you just speak to it.
Yeah, okay. If you unshare your screen, I'll share those slides.
It's unshared.
Okay, so I had unshared it before.
Okay, leave it like that, just
Okay,
like
just
that,
Okay.
and then David can share his slides, which you then can speak to.
give me 1 second to pull those up.
It's the same slides. I think there's a bit of a bandwidth issue. Just
Yeah.
Okay.
here we go.
So just, yeah, let me know when
Okay.
you'd like me to advance.
Okay. Okay. All right. So next. So you can go to the next screen, next slide. All right. All right. So the Hyperledger is about 4 years old. There are 14 projects in the ecosystem. And just for the purposes of this discussion, let's call that ecosystem a greenhouse. There are 14 projects in the greenhouse. I'll explain the concept of a greenhouse later on another slide that shows those details. So there are 3 projects that have matured to 1.0 production release status. One of those projects is currently on 2.1, version 2.1, release 2.1. But the minimum, there are 3 projects that have achieved the minimum of 1.1 production release status. And one of them is on 2.0. That's the other one. There are 14 active community groups, about 67,000 Meetup participants all over the world, and 250, excess of 250 members. Okay. Please go on. All right. So Hyperledger has a modular, what you might call a plug and play approach to hosting projects. Okay. And like I said earlier, you can think of Hyperledger as the family of projects. Okay. The family, the umbrella, the parent, the host of all of those projects. So if you think about a greenhouse would be something like a containerized farm where you have different sections growing different crops. So just like that, Hyperledger is the container, and then there are different farm sections for different types of crops or different types of yeah, we can use crops. So some of those things are libraries that support tools. Some of those things are front-end tools that are designed for end users to use. Some of them are more abstract, and so on and so forth. You see that in the next slide. Please go on. All right, so if you look at this diagram, you can see on the top, there's an annotation, there's a note on the top that says distributed ledgers. So there you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 projects here that are tools for building blockchains, okay? I want to assume that everyone on this call at least understands what a blockchain is, but just for the benefit of everyone on the call, let me just say that a blockchain is, first of all, not crypto. A blockchain is not a cryptocurrency. A blockchain instead is the technology that powers cryptocurrencies. A blockchain, for all intents and purposes, the easiest way to define it is to say that a blockchain is a decentralized database, a database that does not reside in one single place and therefore have one single point of failure. Okay, so all of those items in the top section labeled distributed ledgers are alternative tools for building blockchains. So you could very well use Hyperledger Fabric to build a blockchain, and you could very well use Hyperledger Sawtooth to build a blockchain, just as well as you could use Hyperledger Indy to build a blockchain. And then I'm sure the question will arise that, oh, so why is Hyperledger providing competitive or alternative products that do the same thing? In a sense, they are not exactly competitive, in the sense that if you think about your database products, there's MySQL, which is very popular. There's MongoDB, there's Oracle, there's SQL Server. If you think about it, these guys aren't exactly 100% alternatives for one another. There are situations where there are special circumstances that will help you justify going after a MySQL at the expense of a MongoDB. There will be another project that you might get on that will justify going for a MongoDB over a MySQL. So and the same thing holds for many of those proprietary databases. So think of these 6 distributed ledgers as alternatives, but which have special properties or attributes that strengthen them for specific use cases. We'll come back to that. On the left side at the bottom, you have the libraries. So those are the ones that I mentioned earlier, are kind of like supporting code bases that many times are powering the distributed ledgers that we spoke about a few seconds ago. So take Ursa, for instance. Ursa is a cryptographic library. Arrays, scales, transacts. All of these things are back-end code bases that power the distributed ledgers that we spoke about earlier. So if you think about, for those of you that spent a long time building Windows applications, if you think about your DLLs, dynamic link libraries, you can think of the libraries here as something like that. If you come to the right a bit, there's another section for tools. In this section, you have Avalon, Caliper, Cello, and Explorer. These are also tools designed for end users, like the ledgers, like distributed ledgers, but they are not code-intensive tools. They are tools for managing things like access, provisioning, kind of like the metadata for the distributed ledgers that we mentioned on top. So when you are using a Fabric, an Indy, a Sawtooth, a Bezu, a Borrow, and a Roha, you want to also have the Avalon, Caliper, Cello, and Explorer available to manage the installation and the infrastructure around those things. And that's that. Domain specific. Grid is the only one in this category for now, Hyperledger Grid, because that's the only domain specific tool that has been designed. It was designed for the supply chain industry, and that's the only one in this category for now. And the Hyperledger Labs is the incubation section of Hyperledger. So many of the things, many of the projects that you can see in the distributed ledger section those of them that have matured to production status, passed through the labs. Many of the others are still in the labs, at different stages of incubation. So thank you, David. Can we go to the next slide? All right, so like I mentioned earlier, the major releases, the major recent releases are concerning Fabric, at least recent in the last quarter, in the last 4 months, since January 2020. We have Fabric whose 2.0 release went live in January, and Besu, whose 1.4 release went live in February of this year as well. Next slide. All right, so the next session we'll talk about the new projects. Please go on. Okay, Avalon is so Hyperledger has been traditionally aligned towards the business end, the B2B, if you can use industry lingo, the B2B sector or section of industry. So what that has done is that it has kind of alienated the public permissionless blockchain space, the space where Ethereum and other open public blockchains exist and play. Now, there are a number of projects that Hyperledger is working on and introducing that are specifically targeted at bringing in that community of public permissionless blockchains, AKA the most popular of them, Ethereum. Hyperledger Avalon is one of those things, and it's a ledger-independent implementation of a specific specification that was developed by the Ethereum Alliance. That specification is a trusted compute trusted compute specification. Trusted compute specification, okay? And essentially, it helps to enable the secure movement of blockchains across major blockchain computing power across major processes. Okay. So please go to the next slide. And they want to help even more children start learning. These apps do not make a profit. They will always. All right. So on this slide, so there are a number, I think there's about 47 special interest groups, but this slide just talks about the newest ones. Okay, so if you look at the slide, you will see the Climate Action and Accounting SIG, the special interest group, and the Education Architecture special interest group. Like David mentioned at the beginning, for those of us that are not interested or qualified or empowered to participate or what these guys do is that they connect the code bases that are developed by the different people building these codes, building these products to the end users that need them. So take a Hyperledger Fabric, for instance. There's a bunch of code ninjas, you know, that came together to build that code, that product. The special interest group for climate action could then say, oh, there is something about developing a blockchain solution that helps all the parties in the climate action space across different countries, across different continents, coordinate together. And then they take Fabric, or they take Besu, or they take Indy, or they take Sawtooth, or they take Grid, and they start to connect the last mile. So they start to organize meetups, they start to organize workshops, they start to organize advocacy, you know, and connect with people that can help those things, those code bases move to practical use cases. You know, so that's the design of this particular slide. Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. Okay. So one major benefit. So I've heard one key question from many of the people, at least in Nigeria, and I'm sure it applies for everyone else on this call and many people outside Nigeria as well. I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, okay. So I hear you talking about this Hyperledger. So what's in it for me?" And I think, and the easiest way to answer that question is, with the introduction and increasing adoption, you see how fast Hyperledger is being adopted by industries across the globe in a later slide. But with that trend will come a brand new space opening up for people who have skills in this technology. So take, for instance, right now there's about 25 installations of Hyperledger Fabric alone across the Fortune 50, okay, or the Fortune 500. Now, if you think about that, what that means is that there are at least, if there's at least just one job or two jobs per company in that bracket, that means there are jobs that are opening up. If by this time next year the market for that has doubled, it means that there's twice that many jobs that have opened up. What this also means is that with the increasing opportunities and career opportunities opening up, there will also be opportunities for people like you and I, and many of the people on this call, to prove or at least acquire certifications that demonstrate that they are proficient in using these tools. So there's a number of available qualifications and certifications now. Some of them are only available for the earlier frameworks like Fabric, but there are new certifications coming up every day and being developed every day by the people at Hyperledger for many of the new frameworks as well. So that's the summary here. It's meant to equip those of us that want to build a career in blockchain development with the qualifications that help us prove to the employers that yes, we know these things and we've built the competence in them. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so the next few slides will talk about a lot of use cases. The logos you can see on the right are the companies that have spearheaded the building and development of many of the frameworks that we spoke about earlier. As you all know, the most popular framework, Fabric, was built and donated to Hyperledger by IBM. Sawtooth was built and donated by Intel. And there's a number of all of these companies have had parts to play in building at least one framework. Please go on. Next slide. All right, updates on events. Okay, so at this year's, these are just the highlights of this year's conference that held, thankfully, before the widespread of the current pandemic that has us all at home. But earlier this year, I think that was in February, the event was successful. There were over 450 attendees from over 20 industries, a lot of sessions, a lot of media and industry analysts covering the sessions. And all of these sessions were recorded and are available on the Hyperledger YouTube channel. I think that David can share the link to the channel in the chat, or if that's not available, you can just go to YouTube and search for Hyperledger. It would be, I'm subscribed. I would advise you to just click the subscribe button so that you can get notifications on new events. One thing that I should mention here, just in case I forget later on down the line, is that given this new dispensation where we're all at home and we're doing a lot of virtual meetups, it's also another additional reason, another additional benefit for you to want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, so that, as you're in Africa, you might hear of a use case that is being adopted in Saudi Arabia, in Singapore, in Denmark, in Costa Rica. Just go to the YouTube channel, and then you can see one or two things that may resonate with something that you are either aligned with or a project that you're working on, and you can collaborate and or get ideas for your own project from there. Next slide. Thank you. All right. So I think David has done a good job, talking about how inclusive the Hyperledger community is. The fact that, number one, it's the easiest thing in the world to contribute. Before I started to take active participation role in the local group, I used to be a part of the learning materials development working group, on the global scale. And one of the things that we're doing there was to build authoritative curricula for each of the Hyperledger frameworks, so that people can have one authoritative place to go if you want documentation or information or technical documentation about any of the frameworks. So it's I can attest that it's one of the easiest things in the world to do, to participate. And there are so many avenues. There's direct coding. If you want to be involved that way, you can just go to GitHub, fork the repo, create a pull request, and merge it back. If you're not coding oriented, you can join one of the working groups or special interest groups and use your talents and or resources and or social capital to drive, the mission of Hyperledger. So next slide, please. All right. So each of the red dots, if you try to look beyond the pictures, each of the red dots represents behind the pictures. Each of the red dots represents a meetup location around the world. So Hyperledger is really represented on every continent, and it's satisfying to see this growth, across the world. I think they're onto something. I think we're onto something here. The pictures are also region specific. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Next slide. All right. Okay. So like I said earlier, sorry, the previous one I talked about virtual meetups. Thank you.
Great.
All right. So like I said earlier, given the current exigence, given the current circumstances that we're in, where we can't do so much by way of physical meetup, light. This, for instance, the output of this meetup will be shared on the Hyperledger YouTube channel. And we are encouraging that future virtual meetups, either local or in collaborations like this, are also shared with the Hyperledger YouTube channel so that everybody around the world can learn from what we are doing. Next slide, please. We should be close to the end now. All right, so global use cases. Next slide. All right, Hyperledger embraces the full spectrum of industry use cases, and there's a number of many deployments. So I said earlier, I stand corrected. I was saying earlier that I wasn't sure if it was blockchain 50 or blockchain 500. So there's something called the Forbes blockchain 50. That's a ranking of the top companies within the Forbes, within the top 500 companies that use blockchain. So they call them the blockchain 50, okay? Now, within that blockchain 50, 52% of them, more than half, that's obviously 26 of them, use Hyperledger in one fashion or the other, okay? And based on the most recent breakdown, you can see that half of them, 25 of them, are using Fabric. Now, many of them are using more than one framework. So some of them have Fabric and Aurora, some of them have Fabric and Burrow, some of them have Sawtooth and Indy, stuff like that. So this breakdown shows how, like I said earlier, the space is really growing. So if you have a significant career interest in developing blockchain solutions, this is a bandwagon that you can join. The career prospects are only going to grow because these companies are only going to increase in their adoption of these frameworks. So there's 25 for Fabric, 2 each for Sawtooth and Indy, Grid, Aurora, and Burrow have 1. Now, under the 22 for Ethereum, the survey did not reveal what percentage of those are Besu, which is like Hyperledger's wrapper around Ethereum, and which of them are pure Ethereum. So that's why there's a public in brackets, there's a public with a question mark in parentheses, and Corda and Quorum, which are alternative blockchain frameworks. So as you can see, Hyperledger is dominating the enterprise blockchain land space. Next slide. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, all right. So, this just underscores the previous slide. These are the logos of the companies that were described in the previous slide. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the newest case studies that was highlighted in the last global conference, Hyperledger 2020. Within the global aerospace business, the market for used aeroplane parts, aerospace parts, is largely manual, and nobody knew. But Honeywell saw that opportunity. They used a blockchain solution to plug that manual gap, automate that space, and that's an opportunity that was highlighted at the last Hyperledger conference. So that's a $4 billion space right there. And if they could do that in where they did it, what says that they can do, that any of us can do the same, with our own local spaces or in Africa. All right, next slide.
I think for some of these, we could just provide the links to the slide afterward and let people read through some of the details at the end. I don't know how we are on time.
That's fine. I agree with that, actually.
I agree.
So can you just skip? So this is the ScanTrust. So ScanTrust also, like those guys, use blockchain. All right. No, just go on. Just go on. I think
in the last set are just more details about the project. So again, I'll provide the slides after this. I'll link to my slides and these slides, and then people can go through and read through the details on these. if they want more
Okay.
specifics on any of the given projects or libraries or tools.
Okay, and those are the tools we mentioned earlier: domain specific and labs. That's the last slide. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Any
Hey, let me
questions?
stop sharing my screen so others can share too.
Yeah, I think next up is Eddie. Eddie, can you start sharing your screen?
Hey guys, if you can't hear me, you can comment on the chat box. Otherwise, I'll just proceed. So,
No, yeah, we can
Can
hear
you
you.
share? You can hear you. Are you gonna share your screen, or are you wanna do it? You're not gonna share your screen. Sorry, my
we're sharing. I'm
mistake.
sharing a screen. Give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah. Here you go.
Okay.
Just a second. Just a second. Okay. As I set up, just to break the silence, my name is Eddie from Nairobi. I'll be presenting on a project that we've been working on, an open source project that utilizes Hyperledger Indie to allow creation of self-sovereign identities or decentralized identities. I'll get more details of that as we go ahead. So yeah, I think it's set up now.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Yeah, that's cool. So what we're doing with Kweli is a project under a community of enthusiasts and open source developers, but it's also open to anyone else. And it was an initiative to provide a way to identify people in a digital asset framework. So you realize that we have ways where you can represent an asset in a blockchain ledger. And for that to happen, you'll have to apportion that to the owners and to the respective owners because it's an asset. And for you to do it right, there has to be good security and guaranteed trust between the participants. And what such a system depends on is a trust framework for digital identity. So that now you can identify someone and have the appropriate asset that they own being apportioned to them. So the project called African Digital Asset Framework is a collective that began in 2018, based in Nairobi, but it's anyway decentralized from members of the diaspora and other African countries, where we sought a way to get guys to use decentralized asset framework. So, and one of the things that the initial white paper proposed was how trade can be boosted across intra-African borders and how people can access services in an easier way. So still in the digital asset format, and we all know, or if you haven't, about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which sets Africa as one trade area, and majority of the African countries have ratified the convention for the ACFTA, which means that you can trade things across borders, maybe let's say from Malawi to Niger, without most of the tariffs that are there existing right now. So what's the case right now is intra-African trade is super expensive because of the tariffs imposed, which are more than 5%. That's very high compared to other regions, where like in the EU, like most of the tariffs are scrapped when you're doing trade intra-EU. And with the SCFTA, with all its promise of making Africa like a one trade area, which is like one of the largest trade areas, if not the largest, after the World Trade Organization, is an opportunity to open up a multi-trillion-dollar economy where you can now trade. But then that was proposed by the AU in paper, and we asked ourselves, then what's our role in making this more practical? How can we make this accessible in a digital way? And that's how we sought to extend Kweli from ADAF. So Kweli really came as a way to allow people have decentralized ownership. So these are some of the stats that I was talking about. So presently we have just over 1.2 billion people, close to 1.5. They estimate by the year 2050 we'll have about 2.5 billion people actually, which would be among the highest populations in the world and also the youngest. And for you to have a reliable CFTA network, even in a digital sense, it has to be like in a digital sense that supports everyone to trade. And owing to the fragmented nature of African economies and also African present centralized systems, you realize that having one centralized system would lead to lots of breakages. And so we went low level to a protocol level to now build up on that and have other services built up on that. Because if you're going to have more than, let's say, like more than 1 billion people in the next 30 years using being in the inter-African trade, they'll be doing it in a digital format. And the best way we thought was towards the future. So how do we do this? So I'll go ahead and share a video on what the African Digital Asset Framework really is. And then I've actually mentioned most of the things. So this video gives more context to what I've mentioned and what Kweli is about.
Eddie, we are not seeing the video.
Oh, sorry.
You have to share the correct screen.
Let me share my entire screen because it seems like now I'm trying to do my like is this better now?
The continent is among.
Is it visible now?
No, we're still sharing your screen only. Yeah, if you, yeah, there we go. Perfect. You can start now.
Okay.
Yeah, you can start.
1 billion people. The continent is a market of over 1 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. It is a market of opportunity, but regional has only stood at 11% of trade on the continent. This is changing. Intracontinental trade is rapidly growing and expected to rise by 52%. Transportation by air, railway, and sea will improve connectivity and connect communities for trade and commerce around the continent, unleashing incredible economic value for the people of Africa. Alongside unprecedented industrialization, the continent's young population, mobile-first digital economy, is poised to grow in the fourth industrial revolution. The growth of foundational technologies like digital assets and distributed ledger technologies, otherwise commonly known as blockchain technologies. Over 535 million Africans on the continent will use mobile devices, creating an opportunity for people to access the global digital market for the first time. Digital assets are empowering people to securely own, transact, and exchange items of value like identities, financial instruments, and currencies over the internet for the first time. Transfer of value over the internet will never be the same. People will be connected like never before, lowering barriers to cross-border trade over the internet. With these new technologies and the continent's growth, there is massive potential to build distributed Pan-African economies and to create digitized networks for trade and commerce within the continent and between the diaspora. For example, the cost of sending remittance to the continent can amount to 9.4% of the transaction and take a few days. The cost of sending remittance with digital assets technologies are less than a few pennies and are sent instantly through mobile devices. Over 35 billion US dollars were sent in remittance to the continent last year, and over 77 billion to the Caribbean and Latin America. Trade within the continent and the diaspora will never be the same. They will be driven by people-to-people economies. Digital assets are an unprecedented opportunity to reduce barriers to trade within the continent and its diaspora through digital networks that empower people to trade amongst each other. However, there's an urgent need to sync the technologies and regulatory standards for digital assets across African states with the diaspora. For this, there's an opportunity to create an open source website for any people of any tribe, language, history, or state to contribute, edit, and participate in the creation of standards. Welcome ADAF, the world's first open source platform to create transnational standards for digital assets. ADAF is an open source repository of standards to encourage self-regulation for how digital assets are created, used, transacted, and managed by policymakers, consumers, entrepreneurs, and civil society. Standards are presented, discussed, edited, and implemented.
Fine. So that gives you a brief on what really ADAF is doing and what ADAF is. So just to clarify, what was built with ADAF was is a way to handle all of that and not pegged to any singular ledger. So any other ledger can work on it, and the approach was using Hyperledger Indy because it's the most mature identity framework for decentralized ID. That was the reason why we chose Hyperledger Indy. Of course, there are other frameworks out there that doing centralized identity like UPort from Ethereum and other services. But then with the community around Indy, we really thought it would be best to get started with that. And based on community feedback, we know what to do next in terms of the next technology to use. So what Quell has been designed to be is, as I mentioned, the trust framework, so that you can create secure digital ID applications. And that means that it's a service, it's a service where you can have relying application on top of it. So this is a form of architecture for software architecture to do decentralized ID, and based on a community and lots of documentation. So a critical component for a distributed ledger framework or even a trust framework is the governance side. And how we're handling governance is there is a project within ADAF as well, different from Quilly, that's doing governance infrastructure that will include protocols and rules that have been stipulated by the ACFTA and other intertrade region organizations. So we go straight to the technical side, and this is an introduction to self-sovereign identity, which is an interesting concept and very straightforward concept for personal identity. It's a format where you have user control as the end user holding your personal data as to how your data will be used, as to who will transfer your data, and you really get to have a high, a God eye view of what your data is doing and where it's being used. So think of it as a similar way where you have your personal wallet and it's holding your credentials, and you don't really have to return that wallet to the manufacturer every time you use it or every time you close the wallet, but you still hold cards into it. You hold maybe a national ID card, you hold other forms of identification. Maybe it's a membership card for some club, maybe it's um, a health insurance card, maybe it's a residence card, and all of that, and all of those details are being issued to you by an issuing body. So let's say in the case of a national ID card, that's something that's issued by government, and you hold it in your wallet or in your pocket, which in the digital sense has not been able to be replicated. Where if you have an account on a service, let's say like Google, and Google decides to delete your account, you get locked out and you lose the account altogether, including your data. So what really SSI promises, or even and even delivers, is a way for you to always have that holder for your information, and also steal your information. And so in this framework, you have an issuer, as described, who issues credentials to you, and when you want to go to a place, so you are the holder and you acquire credential, and you're presenting yourself to, let's say, um, a regulatory authority, or if you want to show your card to prove your residence, you get verified. So you present the profile and you get verified. And all of this is handled by a root of trust, which is now the decentralized ledger. So this is a registry that holds the identifiers that are attached to your credentials. So being issued this credential needs a standard format for it to interoperate with other systems, as well as having your ownership being pegged to an identifier, and it has to be a decentralized identifier for it to really function well in terms of the cryptographic operations for your security when now interfacing with the registry. So in my last slide, you can see some description of what really is going on. So for you to have now the credential, there's a standard called the Verifiable Credentials Standard by the W3C consortium. And they've also done a decentralized identifier framework for identifiers. So a decentralized identifier is a way to ID information online. It's a form like a URL, which has its own unique format with which your information is represented with. So it's pegged to you as a user. And it's different from a domain name in the sense that with domain names, you rent them. So if you have abcd.com, you will have it based on the period that it's been lent to you. Once expiry happens, you have to renew it. But then in the sense of a DID, you get to hold it for life, unless you release it into the wild, which doesn't really make sense, because I mean, you can have as many DIDs as possible. So there are ways to generate the DIDs, and for you to present out the information, which are now the credentials, you encode that using verifiable credentials. So how we have designed Query is to have a decentralized ledger, now the registry, where this interaction between the issuer, holder, and the verifier happens. So maybe back to this. So with now your user wallet, now you can hold documents, which are now the credentials. So the need to have Query was from the problems and challenges happening with our identity infrastructure in the continent, where most of the infrastructure to store our ID information is paper-based, and we all know how terrible that can be, maybe in case of a natural calamity or even a fraud. And these are mainly centralized, which means that if someone has a negative motive, they may withdraw identity or credential that has been issued to you. The credential could even be a school certificate. It could be a birth certificate. So if they withdraw it, that would mean that you maybe don't exist. But then with that is also the risk of fragmentation, where you have disparate holders of information and really no way to connect all of them. Where now you want the private side, the private sector to interact with the public sector, which is the government, because there are services which are added in terms of value by the private sector to enable government to provide better services. So what Quelly does is a digital format, as explained, and a decentralized way that supports self-sovereign identity. So with this, you can have a digital environment that you hold by yourself and you own. So in terms of what happens in the interaction is that you have two services where you have your own wallet and let's say like a web app or any other existing service. This could be probably an issuer site. What is happening, you are presenting your credential to the service. So if you'd want to access a licensing site, maybe you need a liquor license for your business, you present it to the Liquor Registration Authority, if such a thing exists. And by doing so, you do that through your mobile phone. And once the credential you presented is verified through a pairwise connection, where you'll have a secure channel to communicate that data between you as a holder and the web app of the Liquor Registration Authority or licensing body. And that gives you the chance to access services easily. So how we've designed Quelly is to have a two-pronged approach where you can have personal SSI tools, which is ways to build personal self-sovereign identity software. So you have the tools and libraries, and also we have organizational SSI, which allows now business wallets, enterprise wallets. So if you own maybe a shop or you own a flower exporting, importing company, you can have your own business wallet where you hold now, let's say like in this scenario, this could be an enterprise wallet or the business wallet, which now holds the licenses that have been issued to you. But at the core, most of the services are the same in the two approaches, only that now the nuances in personal ID and organizational ID, which requires more depth. So in terms of the interactions, or maybe I could pause there. Are there any comments?
Yeah,
So
Eddie, I can. There was a question if it is permission based, permissionless or permissioned. This system of yours, is it public or private?
Okay. So Hyperledger is a public permissioned database. What that means is that the transactions are visible. So you can see what's happening on the ledger, and what goes on the ledger are the decentralized identifiers, only the identifiers in the cryptographic material. So your personal data does not go to the ledger. So if you want to plug it with for other data, you use other databases and data services. In terms of permission, that means that Indy applies a Byzantine fault tolerant system, which means that you need a minimum of 4, which is like 3n plus 1 nodes, which to set up a network. So for that, a service or a node that needs to join the network has to be pre-approved by the other nodes in consensus. So that provides a way that the network cannot go down. So now the difference with Indy and Fabric is that Fabric, you have private permission, where you have private services. What goes on the ledger is only available to the members of the network, and you only join the network by consent and consensus of the members. So the other major difference maybe I could mention is why really Indie and not Fabric. So Fabric has also attempted to do some identity tools and also identity services. I think of Fabric as a multivariate tool. So like Hyperledger to me is like Linux. And then now you have Ubuntu, you have Kali, you have all the other distros of Linux. So with Fabric, I see it like as an Ubuntu. So it's a Swiss knife, like you can use it and modify it for other services. With now Indie, it's specialized libraries for identity. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I think that's clear. I'm not sure how far you with your presentation, because I know the next speaker will talk about the Hyperledger Fabric.
How long do I have? I have like 10 or 5 minutes.
5 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry to rush you.
Almost.
Okay.
No, that's fine. So in terms of the data that you're handling, you have the personal credentials and ways for supporting KYC and also ML checks. You know, you have a decentralized data registry where other services can reference it and do their checks and their verification when doing due diligence. And when extended to an extra use case, you have the in traffic and travel. So as I mentioned, you'll need a wallet to interact with. Could you please mute? Thanks. So the user now invokes actions based on the protocol given in Query. And now you can register and get documents that you need based off on the wallet. So this is a blown up diagram of what really is going on. So here we have the ledger, which we're now using as Hyperledger Indie. And now that has your DID store and their business schemas. So business schemas are like definitions of how a document has to be structured. Now you have a revocation registry to revoke issued documents and key management for public-private key infrastructure. But now here we're using decentralized private key infrastructure, DPKI. Now on top of the ledger, you have a service for like a business registry, which has registered its schemas to the ledger, and any other service, including this or any other service, can define a schema based off on what's given in the ledger and issue that credential. So here we are relying agent, instance, and other wallets which are now accessing it through an API, and that provides a way to interact with Web 2.0, the regular RESTful applications on HTTP. So you can do credential verification directly in the ledger. Remember, the information there is public. So this wasn't really making sense, but I still thought to just going to leave it there. Yeah, it's an open source slide. Yeah, so pretty much done with what Quell is doing. These are the references for the presentation. So maybe if I have like an extra minute, I could take a question.
Yeah, there was some questions in the chat, and I think most of it's answered, and we will definitely share your details because there is quite a bit of interest. But we'll share the details in the chat. It was already shared. So just for the fact of time, we're sitting on we got like 20 minutes left or 40 minutes left. I think for Gerard, if you want to go ahead.
All right. While I'm granting access to my Zoom, I will just kick it off. Yeah, very warm welcome to those who are watching live and maybe later on the replay. I'm pretty much picking up where David, Eddie left off in a sense of inviting all of you to actually join and to not only participate in the open source development, but also use those tools and those frameworks that are currently out there. So I myself, working for IBM, I've come more from a business angle. Started on the Hyperledger Fabric journey pretty much since version 0.6, quite famous version, which was pretty much deprecated and replaced by version 1, like 4 years ago. So I've followed the journey, and for me, it was like the whole experience and the best experience to actually learn and to understand the technology, to get a mindset around decentralization, about why blockchain actually makes sense in an enterprise context. Before I started actually working on Fabric and using it in my day-to-day job, I was very much obviously hooked by this idea of a public decentralized blockchain technology, and obviously everyone of you typically start with with Bitcoin and Ethereum, but yeah, it took some time to understand why it makes sense for companies to not go public but rather on a permissioned ledger, and that's where the journey started. And since then, I'm just super enthusiastic about the technology. I try to spread the word as often as I can. I teach at universities because overall, we'll see this the next slide. I want to spark your interest and your appetite of getting your hands on, because just beginning of the year, so LinkedIn is basically publishing their like statistics about skills that are in high demand, and beginning of the year they published the skills for 2020, and actually just repeating what the previous speakers talked about, blockchain is for sure one skill that's in high demand. We have way too few expertise on the market. We have way too few developers who speak blockchain, and actually it doesn't really matter if it's a particular solution, if it's a particular technology like Fabric or any other Hyperledger blockchain, or if it's even an open blockchain. It's just the whole concept of decentralized application development, smart contract development, is something that's not really widespread. Also because of the fact that there's no formal education in most of the universities. So there's just a handful of universities that actually that actually have some sort of curriculum of for blockchain. Hence, I hope this sparks your interest, and let's just walk you through a couple of like a high-level overview of what Hyperledger Fabric is, and we plan to build on top of that, and to actually in future meetups, in future okay, I'm just checking the chat because it's popping up all the time, and I thought there might be an issue with the connection, but everything good. So what this should be all about is to get you started, to not teach you in the like in the super nitty-gritties of Hyperledger Fabric, to become an expert in what the consensus is all about that Hyperledger Fabric is using, and so on and so forth, but rather how to actually apply it, how to get started, how to make your first ideas real. And it doesn't matter if you're a techie, if you're a business analyst, if you're an application developer, if you're keen on getting into blockchain, we should have some answers for you. So it's already been said that Fabric is probably one of the most mature permissioned blockchains out there. It's quite advanced when it comes to features. It just has been released as version 2, means a stable release has been out there for quite a long time now. It's widely adopted within the enterprise space, as you've heard before. Hence, it's basically a good place to start if you plan to kick off your career in blockchain development, because it doesn't mean that you have to start your own, I don't know, company and I don't know, start an ICO, issue your tokens whatsoever. It can literally mean you're hiring at one of the major companies who are searching for blockchain expertise and become a developer, become a technical expert, an SME in a large corporation. Just speaking of IBM, we are scarce of blockchain expertise. So even a company that has worked in that space for quite a long time now is desperately searching for skilled practitioners. All right, this is like the primer that you get when you open when you Google for Hyperledger Fabric and you end up on the Hyperledger wiki. And it highlights, it sums up what Hyperledger Fabric actually is. And I'd like to, and it has already been mentioned before, but I'd like to compare it to an operating system for highly decentralized and highly secure applications. It's not meant to be the one and only solution and platform for all your IT needs. So it's definitely not replacing every existing IT system that's currently out there. So you might, sometimes it's a little bit, people are too enthusiastic when they talk about blockchain is replacing the whole internet and taking over all the legacy systems that are currently out there. That's not its purpose. Its purpose is to be a highly secure, distributed way of transacting, and yeah, that's what we should use it for. So it has already been said, it's made for enterprises. It's not made for your public cryptocurrency. It's made for enterprise use cases. Hence, it's also made for having some sort of, let's call it, control over who is actually able to be part of this network that you're building. Hence, it is permissioned. There is some sort of network governance going on. But we'll take a look at that a little bit later. What's important is that Hyperledger Fabric is, by definition, a general purpose blockchain. Means it's not specializing in any particular industry or in any particular technology. That's why we have other DLTs out there, like it's already been mentioned, Indy, as the specialized blockchain for self-sovereign identity. That's why we have IORA for especially focusing on the more like on the mobile and IoT space for DLT. So Fabric should be a good balance of certain aspects and give you like a good breeding ground for putting your applications on. It is compared, and one can argue it's an unfair comparison to compare it with public blockchain, but by definition, a permissioned ledger is way more, or it's way better suited for a high transaction throughput, which doesn't mean that the public chains aren't catching up with various layer technologies like Lightning on the Bitcoin network. But as of today, and as we are speaking of companies that are betting on a technology to build their applications on, their blockchain-based applications on, Fabric is superior to those, and hence Fabric is and we saw it before. That's probably the reason why Fabric is just as widespread as we have seen. And just to give you some figures, one of the largest networks built on Hyperledger Fabric, TradeLens, which is a joint venture from Maersk and IBM. It's up and running for a little bit more than 1 year now. Most of the international cargo companies are using that platform to actually put all the trading information. So all the containers that are shipped across the world, are all the documents, all the location data, and so on and so forth, are basically handled over this platform. And they've just reached a milestone of more than 1 billion events, more than 10 million documents that are actually handled, more than 22 million containers that have been tracked. So those are figures that are quite significant, and that demonstrates that those platforms actually can scale. And that's something that should give us hope that should be an argument for companies to actually trust the technology and to not get into any technical or religious discussions around what's the best consensus, what's the best blockchain out there. For me, I'm just pragmatic. The best blockchain is the one that that you can actually build on, and that's suited for your job. And that might be in one case Hyperledger Fabric. That might be in another use case where it's more meant to issue credentials, Hyperledger Indy. And take the best tool for whatever problem you want to solve. That's the main message. We can probably speak for hours about the technical details, and but let's just briefly at least skip over what Hyperledger Fabric tries to achieve. And it tries to give you a platform to build existing business processes on. So to basically replicate what's out there in the legacy world, but also to transform those business processes. And that's basically the more complicated part of getting this mindset of distributed computing, this mindset of smart contracts that could automate various business processes that have been very labor intense and manual before, by just trusting the mathematics and the underlying blockchain. This is something that's at its core of Fabric, and we'll later see why, from a technical perspective, this is actually greatly achieved. Obviously, companies understood quite early the benefits of having a decentralized, distributed system with automated data replication and making sure that data can only be changed by following the consensus rules or the smart contracts. But they soon shied away a little bit when they understood, well, that means that I have to open up to my not only business partners, but often also competitors. So they have the need for, not on the one hand, being more open, being more open when it comes to exchanging data with the partners, but also want to keep privacy and confidentiality. Means there need to be mechanisms in place, and that's what Fabric actually caters for since the beginning, of various ways of making sure that data is only shared with those nodes, with those organizations in my network that should actually be that should have visibility to it. We talked about scaling and throughput, quite impressive numbers out there of various networks. There are some technical things, like there is support for a rich database, or for proper databases that you can perform rich queries on. Important for companies, again, we're talking about companies, they're used to creating reports, they're used to, creating audit logs for their regulators and so on and so forth. So they are used to, to performing analytics on their data that they have, and Fabric caters for that in various ways. No application, no program is built once and lives forever. We always need to upgrade the rules. We need to fix bugs. We need to enhance our network. We need to, we want to grow the ecosystem. Hence, we have to have mechanisms in place to have some sort of network governance on the one hand, and on the other hand, also from a technical perspective, some sort of DevOps process to make sure that our chain code, our smart contracts are accurate, are up to date, and are up to date with the required business rules. Hence, upgrading your smart contracts is part of one of the core functionalities of Hyperledger Fabric. Yeah, we talked about having or governing a permission network. Just think about it. You might want to govern that goes deep into identity, but just to give you some idea, you might be able to govern network access on an organization level. Means you might want to control the access for, I don't know, your business partners, but you're not interested as a consortium to control or to have very granular control of who is actually accessing the network. So you're just like permitting access to on an organization level, and every organization has their own permissioning systems to actually where to maintain their employees, for example, and they are in charge of making sure that only those employees who have an interest and work to do to actually interact with the blockchain solution should actually be granted access. So that's why this bring your own identity. Fabric is quite agnostic when it comes to what identity system you use. If it's like a Microsoft Active Directory, if it's a Linux LDAP, whatever. We are open to that. That brings us basically to the next point. It's quite modular. It's have various components that we can just plug and play and replace with either
You look at me in the face and tell me that.
with which can basically come out of the box. So various data stores that Fabric ships with, or can be extended by custom implementations. We already mentioned Fabric is not built on any token. You're not paying any gas price. You're not. You don't have to buy in before you can actually use the network. It is token neutral, which doesn't mean that you can't develop your own token or asset that is represented by a token on top of Fabric. And you can even take it that far and adhere to existing standards like the ERC20 standard and re-implement it on top of Hyperledger Fabric, if this makes sense. And there are certain use cases out there which I've seen where this is a very viable approach. And this everlasting question of what's the best consensus mechanism out there. Fabric uses a mixture of various approaches of making sure that consensus is reached. We are not talking about proof of work, proof of stake. We are talking about consensus on a more technical level, but at the end, once you dig deeper into the architecture of Hyperledger Fabric, you will see that this doesn't play as much as a major role as in public blockchains. All right. Again, we will have plenty of time, hopefully in future, to go deeper, and that's actually something that we want to ask the community if there's interest out there for having maybe a deep dive session or series actually for future occurrences of those meetups, or as a side track or whatever. let me briefly, in the interest of time, just go through some of the other points just to highlight. So we talked about permissioned, and what does it mean, permissioned? Just a reminder or refresher for those who haven't come across of the two like major differentiators between various blockchain technologies: permission versions versus permissionless. Permissionless, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all those coins that are listed on CoinMarketCap, typically built on permissionless blockchain systems, means nobody needs to grant you access to participate in the consensus mechanism. Nobody needs to grant you access to look up data on the ledger with blockchain explorers and so on and so forth. Access is in general anonymous if there are no KYC or any other mechanisms in place. But this also means that from a trusting perspective, you must basically assume that people are behaving bad. So it's just a different mindset of trying to secure the system, and that's perfectly fine for a public permissionless blockchain. Hence, there are some drawbacks in those systems and some advantages, as with every technology out there. In contrast, the permission networks, and those are the ones that are under the Hyperledger Fabric umbrella or under the Hyperledger umbrella in general, because all the DLTs under Hyperledger are permissioned, means that there is some sort of network governance, there is some sort of consortium idea going on to grant, to onboard and offboard participants, to grant access to the network. This also often means that the identity isn't generally known, because people are, before they onboard someone to the network, they know each other in person, or they have a business relationship, or any other kind of relationship. Hence, identity it's not as anonymous as a permissionless system. And we talked about the governance already, and given that we already are familiar with the partners and the other nodes on the network, we simply have a different level of trust. Hence, we can do things like consensus in a more efficient way. So Fabric is a permissioned general purpose blockchain. What's very, very cool, and what I see as one of the great advantages of Hyperledger Fabric, is that it is built on existing languages, programming languages out there. There is no need to learn a new programming language. You can leverage on what's already out there in your company, what's available on the market, and especially languages like JavaScript/Node.js, Java in general. Those are widely spread and adapted and taught programming languages. Hence, it's relatively easy to find someone with those skills and upskill them or train them on Hyperledger Fabric. And that's what I see as one of the great advantages out there. So you don't need to be disappointed that that you are not yet super skilled with Hyperledger Fabric. If you speak one of those languages or can pick them up, then it's relatively easy for you to get started with smart contract development. Same goes for application SDKs, and we'll come to that in a second. And there are a couple of other characteristics which are very interesting to talk about. And again, that all of them fill at least 1 hour of diving deeper into those technologies, those available options, and more than happy to unpack that with you together. So again, deep dive. Let's shelve it for the next time. That's something that's quite interesting, or that's quite important to highlight. Hyperledger Fabric is also agnostic when it comes to where to actually deploy and run your Fabric peers. So, and actually you can pick and choose whatever combination you like. You can run it purely on-prem in your own data centers with your business partners. You can go fully cloud and run it on one cloud provider, or in a more decentralized approach on a mixture of different cloud providers plus on-chain. So absolutely flexible when it comes to the deployment model. And this also appeals to enterprises who have like restrictions or regulatory guidelines within their country to host data maybe only within the premises of their country. Hence, very important point that we are very agnostic, and we are more than happy that so many cloud providers actually adopted Fabric and put it into their portfolio. So that's actually very, very cool. All right, let's skip the architecture and the network architecture for now. I think for today, this is a little bit overwhelming. More than happy to follow up with you on that, and please reach out for more technical talk later on. Let's rather skip, or let's rather give you some input to actually get started until we talk to each other again. Again, speaking to not only the devs out there, even business analysts, SMEs in a certain industry, you're even more important because you're actually you're bringing the business use case to the table. And for that, to translate that into something that the blockchain developers can actually implement, you certainly have to map this business requirement to a more like blockchain mindset, which means talking in certain terms and in certain concepts that can be translated to a blockchain-based application and translated into smart contracts and blockchain network. Hence, there is a whole process around that has been established for modeling business networks to ideate and map those concepts into technical concepts. And this could eventually be something that we take to one of the next sessions to run with a certain business case in mind, kind of a small workshop. What does it mean to develop and model a blockchain application without talking too much about the technology, but rather on a more abstract level? So that's something very interesting and often overlooked when it comes to blockchain expertise and how to get started with a blockchain based use case. Second, you might be very keen to get going with this application, but your expertise with blockchain, but your expertise and your specialty and skills is rather maybe on the front end. So you're an expert on UX, you're an expert on mobile, on making user-friendly mobile applications. Well, we need you too. We need someone who makes this quite technical concept of smart contracts appealing to the general population and to the everyday man to use it, because at the end, they certainly don't have interest in understanding the nitty-gritty parts of the underlying blockchain, but rather just want to get things done, and getting things done in the most convenient way. And given what I've experienced in the past, the UI is typically the thing that sells the whole solution. So more than ever, this is one of the more critical parts of the blockchain project. So having skilled application developers who can connect to our blockchain-based infrastructure. And last but not least, obviously the blockchain developer. So the one who is actually digging deep into smart contracts and adapting those skills. From a Fabric point of view, the one-stop shop that I can highly recommend is the Visual Studio Code extension, which is called IBM Blockchain Platform. Disclaimer, no strings attached. There's nothing you have to pay for. This is purely open source. It's just branded for IBM blockchain, but gives you a great starting point for setting up your local dev environment to spin up your local Fabric network on your machine, giving you all kinds of tutorials to get started, gives you sample codes, super quick and easy way to get going. Doesn't matter which operating system you're on, which programming language you are going to use for your smart contract. This is the most convenient way to get started. So highly recommended. And then just Google is your friend. Search for up-to-date tutorials. One good source is the developer portal from IBM. Lots of step-to-step or step-by-step tutorials, guidance, code patterns, best practices, even projects that you can participate with are hosted there. So just browse around and pick those articles that you're most interested in. Good starting point. And then, already been mentioned, training and certifications that are offered by the Hyperledger Foundation. And the Hyperledger Fabric developer course has just been released. Hence, also a great thing to have on your CV, especially when applying to companies that are searching for blockchain developers. So it's a good job to be in. Yeah, it's a good, solid way to make or to earn your salary, and it makes a hell of a lot of fun. We'll share those slide decks obviously afterwards with you. Hence, all the links are yeah, just a starting point and advice. It's not biased by any company. Everything is open source. For us, it's important to get the word out, to just grow the ecosystem, grow the network, because the larger the ecosystem, the more natural it becomes for companies to apply this technology, and the more people are talking to their managers and decision makers about blockchain and explaining them the difference about cryptocurrencies and permissioned enterprise-grade blockchains like Hyperledger Fabric, the better for all of us. Hence, yeah, please support us in that journey. And yeah, if there are a couple of key takeaways from that very quick session, just get started. There's no need to wait. Blockchain technology has been out there for more than 10 years. Educate yourself on other blockchain technologies, but to get started, to get going with enterprise use cases, then Hyperledger Fabric is probably, as of today, the best way to get started. Again, there is the need for expertise in all large corporations. There is no enterprise out there which is not in some way or the other experimenting or already going into production with a blockchain-based system. So it's and we heard it before, it's only growing. Demand is only growing. Hence, you're definitely not too late to start your career in blockchain, no matter if you're a developer, consultant, business analyst, UX expert, all of you are needed. And as the theme of this year's Hyperledger Forum was, all of you are welcome here, not only welcome, but also needed. Hence, yeah, that was my part for today's Genesis meetup. Handing it back to the moderator for Q&A, and thank you so much for your time and interest.
Jabir, yeah. David, do you want to have a final say quickly before we go into Q&A?
Sure, absolutely. And I will say that this room is going to be used by another meeting in a few minutes. So apologies that we are going to be short on time. But I would just say this is great. Thank you for everybody for joining. I definitely look forward to doing this in the future. And I really hope we can grow this and expand it and make it a useful resource for everybody interested in Hyperledger in Africa.
Okay, yeah, I think I was also worried about this room might be used by someone else. I would suggest that the way we all got to know about this is via the different meetup groups, via the different towns in Africa. I think the best is what we'll do is we'll share all of this information again via those meetup regions or cities. And I would suggest also on the wiki that we use now to set up this one, that we start planning the next one. And I think the best or the most important thing would be to select the correct time, as we are playing across about 3 to 4 time zones. But yeah, I think instead of taking up more time here is to participate on the wiki. We'll share it again, I think from the different people, from Eddie in Nairobi and in Nigeria. If we can just share all the information with our respective people, how to get to that wiki, so that we can all share our inputs there for the next meeting and the next topic and the best time.
Joubert?
Yes?
Yes, I shared the wiki page on the chat, and we have already set a date for the next meetup with David. Anybody is welcome to participate and share ideas. So probably the next meetup will be held on 28th of May. So that is everybody is welcome. I already tagged most of the people who are in the first meetup, in this current meetup. So if you know anybody else who can be interested in participating, be welcome to add them too. And thank you all for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's put the agenda together for the next meetup, and we'll share it out with all the different meetup groups, and then yeah, we will meet again in a few weeks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David, for waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning.
No worries.
Exactly.
No worries.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it.
Stay safe, everyone, and
thank you.
have a good rest of the day and a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone. See you next time.
Have a nice day. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.